neighborhoods, their townships. And so we started this with training on online tools in Newark last year, and we've had 5 trainings so far. And those over the past year have covered permitting processes, the environmental justice law, funding, and stuff like that. We've had them in Newark, in Camden, in Trenton, and there were a few that were just online. And so this year we're kicking it off with this workshop or this training series that is going to be divided into 3 sessions, all about enforcement. So in Camden in the fall, we had a community training on permitting. And in that training, people learned about how DEP works, how its various programs work to protect water, land, and air in New Jersey. And during that training, we got a lot of questions on, well, what if those rules are violated? What happens next? And so that gave us the idea to share more about how DEP's enforcement processes work so that people can better understand how we enforce various issues, how community members can report violations, and how you can learn more through our online tools. It could be challenging to figure out how to find information, how to understand that information once you find it, and learn who you can ask if you want to learn more. So at this meeting and the next 2, we're aiming to show you what tools are available to you to learn more, and try to explain all the vital work that DEP staff is doing in our various compliance and enforcement teams. So tonight will be an introduction. We have staff who will talk to you about, from our Office of Enforcement Policy, who will talk to you about their work. We have staff from the Community Collaborative Initiative who will talk to you about how they're working with municipalities on the ground and how the WARN-DEP hotline and app works. We'll learn about data miner and how to find enforcement reports online, and much more. So tonight will be the intro. Next week in Newark, we're having a meeting that will go over Odors 101 and how that process works. And we'll also hear from some community advocates about some projects they're doing on the ground. And the week after that in Camden, we will hear from our compliance and enforcement teams in solid waste, in water, and in coastal land use. So we're hoping that you can soak up all this information, put a face to the people who do this work, and have the opportunity to ask your questions. So during the presentations today, you can feel free to post any of your questions in the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A section, or you can raise your hand during the Q&A and we'll just call on you at that time. And lastly, all of these meetings will be recorded. You can also look back at the meetings last year if you have not attended them, or if you did and just want a refresher. So after the meeting, we will share with everyone who registered the recordings, any PowerPoints and links that people talk about. We will send those back. And tonight there is Spanish simultaneous interpretation. If you click on, I think, the globe at the bottom that says interpretation, you can join the Spanish channel there. And with that, I'll hand it over to Joe Trom and Alfonso Armando, who are going to be presenting, doing our first presentation. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so my name is Joe Trom. I am a program specialist with the Office of Enforcement Policy. Just in terms of my personal background, I've been with the department now for about 10 years. I started as an inspector with the Land Use Enforcement Program, was there for 6 or 7 years before transitioning over into the Office of Enforcement Policy. So I have that on-the-ground enforcement experience to kind of share with you and hopefully demystify the enforcement process as much as I can. I will note that this is a very general overview of how the enforcement program typically functions. There may be specific instances or specific circumstances where there may be certain nuances that we won't really have time to get into, but this will give you a general overview of how enforcement typically works. Next slide. So here's what we're going to get into. We'll start with an overview of my office, the Office of Enforcement Policy, the different programs that we encompass and what our role and function is in the department. We'll then spend the bulk of the time talking about the enforcement process itself, from initial investigation through eventual litigation, to just explain how that process works. I'll give a very brief overview of some of the different programs that have enforcement um, authorities in the department. That'll be a very high level overview because a number of these programs will be giving their own presentations later, and you'll get more details from the specific subject matter experts in those programs. I'll then get into the different partnerships and coordination that we work with through the department, because enforcement is not just a DEP thing. We frequently work with either federal, other state, county, local, other government officials, and then end with some tools that the public has to engage in the enforcement process. Next. So here's a high-level org chart for our office, the Office of Enforcement Policy. We are headed by Kimberly Cahall, the Chief Legal Advisor to the department and the Chief Enforcement Officer. So the purpose of the Office of Enforcement Policy is to really manage the policy development and coordination between the different enforcement groups for the goal of ensuring consistency and advancing the department's affirmative enforcement agenda across the different media program areas. So within our programs area, we have the primary Office of Enforcement Policy. Under there, we have a group that's Local Environmental Management and Right to Know, headed by Walt Beland, who's the Bureau Chief. So local environmental management, that is coordination through the county health departments under the County Environmental Health Act, where we basically subdelegate a number of our enforcement programs, for example, in the solid waste or air programs, to the local county health departments to go out and do those inspections. There's also the Community Right to Know program, which is more of an emergency response program area, deals with maintaining an inventory of hazardous materials at different facilities so that if there's some sort of emergency, first responders know what they're getting into. Within OEP, the Office of Enforcement Policy, we have a kind of core policy focused area, really headed by Armando Alfonso, who's here with me. He's the Deputy Chief Enforcement Officer for the program. I work with him closely. There's about 4 or 5 of us in that group that really focus on the policy developments, legal research, and high-level case management and coordination between the different programs. We also have in our group Idrissa Kamal, who is our civil rights officer and legal specialist, who focuses on developing the department's civil rights compliance program. And also within the Office of Enforcement Policy, we have Dana Hames, who's the executive director of the New Jersey Site Remediation Professional Licensing Board. So with contaminated sites in New Jersey, those cleanups are basically managed by licensed site remediation professionals that are overseen by a licensing board, and our office has the staff that runs that board and manages the licensing renewals and approvals and things of that nature. Also, more generally, under our manager's umbrella, since she's now also the chief legal advisor as well as chief enforcement officer, we have the department's legal and regulatory affairs programs, Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration, and the Office of Dispute Resolution. So we get pulled into a lot of different issues that pop up in the department, because our primary focus for all of this is coordination and consistency throughout the different program areas. Next. So in terms of the enforcement process itself, the first thing to kind of keep note of is that enforcement of environmental regulations typically takes one of 2 paths, either administrative enforcement or civil litigation. And there can be overlap between those two, but they're kind of their own distinct processes. Administrative enforcement is kind of the internal mechanisms that the department has in terms of issuing violations and orders and going through an administrative law process to go have a hearing before an administrative law judge, but ultimately the commissioner renders the final decision there. However, most of our statutes also allow us to file complaints in superior court and basically file a lawsuit against people who are violating our statutes to go directly into court for civil litigation. And we'll break down both of those processes in detail. Next. So administrative enforcement is the bread and butter of the department's enforcement mechanism. This is kind of the primary default method that we go through. Um, the process almost always starts with a specific site inspection. Those inspections can be triggered either by a complaint that comes in to the WARN-DEP hotline, which you'll hear about more later, or it could be a scheduled inspection of a regulated facility based on issued permits. Some programs have a certain quota of inspections of specific facilities that they're supposed to meet every year. That's part of our coordination with EPA for federally delegated programs. Other programs, like for example, the land use program, looks at permits that get issued and sometimes selects ones based on different priorities to go out and inspect and check compliance, even if there's not specifically a mandate to do so. Those inspections can be based on looking at either reporting data that a specific regulated facility is supposed to maintain or provide to the department, various sampling results, site measurements, photographs based on the type of activity that's happening. And the scope of the inspection can vary wildly from program to program. Some programs, when dealing with permit compliance inspections, have a discrete checklist of specific items that they go to the facility to look through and see either yes or no, the facility is complying, or no, it's not. Some of the more complicated inspections, though, are the ones that come in through complaints in the hotline, where we get complaints of unpermitted activities, people that are doing something that they should have gotten a permit for but didn't, because then we don't have that basic checklist to really go off of, and you have to go out and investigate from scratch to verify exactly what the activity is and whether or not it's regulated and whether or not it needed a permit. Once that investigation is completed, and if we identify a violation that's taken place on site, typically the next step is the issuance of a notice of violation. The notice of violation is not a formal order. It does not compel compliance. It notifies the responsible party that the department has identified a violation of specific statutes or regulations and provides an opportunity for voluntary compliance. It does not assess a penalty, and because it's not a final agency action in that way, it's not an appealable document. Typically, notices of violation will provide a specific timeline for either providing a written response to the department, outlining what steps they're going to take to achieve compliance, or a specific deadline for achieving compliance with the identified violations. If the facility does not avail themselves of this opportunity to voluntarily comply, some programs will then start to issue follow-up notices of violation that start getting more specific in terms of the type of relief that we could potentially seek, such as the issuance of orders or penalties. And if we still cannot get compliance from a facility or property owner at that stage, that's where we start getting into our administrative orders. Because we're dealing with administrative governmental work, the alphabet soup is everywhere. There are acronyms all over the place. You may hear AONA CAPA or no CAPA thrown around. Those are the main types of orders that we typically issue. So an AONA CAPA is an administrative order, a notice of civil administrative penalty assessment. So it has both an administrative order component where we are now ordering a facility or a property owner to take specific corrective actions to cure a violation, and it assesses a penalty. The no CAPA is just a notice of civil administrative penalty assessment. That typically happens where compliance has already occurred, but the department's determined that a penalty is still appropriate, and just it's not ordering any sort of corrective action because there is no longer any corrective action to take, but it is assessing that penalty. And once we order someone to take specific action or order someone to pay an administrative penalty, that makes these orders an appealable document and triggers certain rights to appeal. In this process, that right is for what's called an adjudicatory hearing. before the Office of Administrative Law. And that's this next step where people can submit these hearing requests. So the Office of Administrative Law is a separate agency that deals with all of these types of disputes and contested cases from the agencies throughout state government. Once a hearing request comes in and it's approved, that request gets transmitted to the Office of Administrative Law and assigned to the docket of an administrative law judge. Um, Once that happens, the administrative hearing process, it's very trial-like in nature. There is discovery that occurs. There is testimony that happens before the administrative law judge. There is cross-examination of witnesses. It goes through that whole process, and then the administrative law judge issues what's called an initial decision, where they make specific findings of fact and conclude whether or not the department has met its burden of proof for whatever actions taken. Typically, we have to demonstrate that the violation that we're alleging has occurred by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning that it must be at least more likely than not that what we're saying happened. So it's not the same level of proof that you hear about in criminal matters, beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a lower burden of proof, but it's still a burden that we have to meet in upholding our administrative actions. Alternatively, some cases may get selected for what's called alternate dispute resolution, which is a mediation program that the department has, where the office has a person who basically acts as a impartial mediator. They're not there to take sides between either the department or the responsible entity. And you go through organized mediation sessions to see if we can negotiate some kind of settlement. Sometimes that's a viable option, and you can find a way of figuring out the best approach to curing the violations. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes ADR is either not appropriate based on, how particularly combative the enforcement action is. If it's just clear that trying to negotiate a settlement at that stage isn't appropriate, then we'll typically wait for the hearing in front of OAL before an ALJ. Or if we try ADR and we don't get anywhere, then we can still transmit the hearing request over to the Office of Administrative Law for that adjudicatory hearing. So once the administrative law judge, the ALJ, issues that initial decision, that decision gets sent to the Commissioner of DEP for review, and the Commissioner of DEP issues the final decision on the matter. The Commissioner can either adopt, reject, or modify the administrative law judge's findings. So if the administrative law judge says that we've not met our burden of proof, but when the Commissioner reviews it, he disagrees, he can reject the administrative law judge's decision and render a final decision upholding our order, or vice versa. Sometimes the administrative law judge could say they agree with us, but once it goes in front of the commissioner, maybe he doesn't. Just because the commissioner is the one rendering the final decision does not mean it is a rubber stamp of the agency's action. It is a formalized process based on reviewing the findings of fact and law, where he renders the final decision in this contested case. That final decision is then appealable to the appellate division of the Superior Court, and you can get into a more traditional judicial court process. But that overall is the scope of what the administrative enforcement process looks like, from inspection to final agency order. And that process can sometimes take years in terms of how long it takes from the actual inspection and issuance of the notice of violation to a final decision being rendered. And that could be because there's delays in terms of pursuing settlement negotiation to see if you can work out a resolution without having to go through the cost and expense and time of the actual formal hearing process. Or sometimes there are just delays because of how many hearing requests a particular ALJ has on their docket. Discovery takes a long time in terms of exchanging records and developing that administrative record for the basis of the case. So because these layers of process take time, but it's an effective tool for ensuring that our regulations are complied with. Next slide. So on the other side of this coin, We have civil litigation, which is more the traditional lawsuit that you would think of that would take place in the standard court system in front of a judge. Now, as I mentioned previously, the commissioner's final decision is appealable to the appellate division. So that's where it starts with administrative enforcement can be a predicate to civil litigation. But it's not always the case. Sometimes we do file a complaint directly with the Superior Court, either in the Law Division or Chancery Division, as an initial matter for developing a case. Some of our statutes allow us to go through this process on summary proceedings where the court can render a decision just based on the initial findings, filings, and responses. So you don't have the same protracted level of discovery or the trial. But sometimes that's not always viable. And you have to go through the same sort of standard discovery process, exchange of evidence, information, testimony, and then an actual formal trial. These types of civil trials typically happen before the judge without a jury. So the judge is rendering decisions based on both fact and law and then rendering the decision. And of course, the trial level court's judge is still also appealable to the appellate division of Superior Court. For some examples of this type of civil litigation, there's a link here to the Attorney General's Office Securing Environmental Justice webpage that has summaries of a number of previous cases that we have filed related to ongoing enforcement matters in overburdened communities specifically. Next slide. And of course, through both this administrative and civil enforcement process, most things end up getting settled. It's kind of rare to actually go through and have to get to that final adjudicatory hearing or final judicial process, primarily because most people don't want to have to spend the time and money to fight us tooth and nail all the way down the line. And it's usually more efficient for everyone involved if we can come to some sort of agreement in how a specific case needs to be resolved. Now, these settlements can take different forms, either administrative consent order, judicial consent order, or settlement agreement. The administrative consent order, or ACO, is the kind of standard default document that we use to settle an administrative enforcement issue. A judicial consent order is pretty much the same sort of thing as an administrative consent order, except it's one that's being signed off on by and approved by a judge as part of a settlement of an ongoing litigation matter. If you see something that's just called a settlement agreement, usually that means that at that point, we're just settling the amount of penalty that needs to be paid, that there's no longer any specific compliance items that we need the facility or property owner to go through and complete. So when we're negotiating these settlements, basic compliance with our regulations is still required. What typically gets negotiated is the specific steps that need to be taken to get to that point, the timeline that the responsible entity has to complete coming into compliance, outlining the process for, applying for permits if they need to apply for permits, or removing certain unauthorized activities, what restoration might look like if there was a land disturbance that needs to be restored. So it outlines the steps that the responsible entity needs to come through in terms of coming back into compliance. And will also typically involve a reduced penalty if there was some sort of penalty assessment. Most programs, on average, will probably reduce the penalty by a certain percentage. There's not really a hard and fast rule. It depends on what makes sense in that moment based on the underlying violation, how willing the responsible party is to enter the settlement and come to compliance. But one thing that's worth noting is some programs, such as the water program under the Water Pollution Control Act, have a statutory restriction on how much they can reduce their assessed penalties to. For example, so we can't settle or reduce water pollution penalties by more than 50%. So there are sometimes statutory restrictions on what a settlement can actually look like. And then in certain circumstances, these settlements may also include supplemental environmental projects, or SEPs, which is an environmentally beneficial project in a community that the cost of which is used to offset an assessed penalty amount. So for example, if a penalty was assessed for $100,000 and the responsible entity offers to perform some sort of SEP, such as one example that happened in Camden was converting an old gas station property into a rain garden. The cost of doing that project can offset some of that penalty liability. And the department recently updated its supplemental environmental project policy in February of 2024. That new policy includes specific updates to try to increase the amount of community engagement in that process of developing what a supplemental environmental project would look like. That policy is available on the department's website. But the one thing to note there is that a supplemental environmental project is entirely voluntary on the part of the responsible entity. The department cannot compel someone to do that SEP. It has to be a voluntary action on their part. But it's a tool that we try to leverage wherever appropriate to do so in coming up with these types of settlements. Next slide. So transitioning from the process itself to just the enforcement programs generally, there are far more enforcement programs in the department than we would ever have time to fully discuss. So the tiny font you see on the slide here is kind of the point. There's just too much there in the ambit of what we do, ranging everything from Bureau of X-ray Compliance that deals with X-ray machines at medical facilities to the fact that the department has two police agencies housed inside the department with our conservation officers or parks police, and as well as the more kind of traditional enforcement programs that people think of are water, solid waste, land use, and air programs, which are the ones that I'm going to touch on briefly here. Next slide. So our air programs and our solid waste and underground storage tanks programs, the air program primarily operates under the New Jersey Air Pollution Control Act, where we regulate stationary sources of air emissions. Think the classic smokestack. Mobile sources, we have a major initiative right now involving tampering or emissions deletion from diesel trucks, dust emissions, odor complaints. All of these are things that can fall within that air program. As for solid waste and underground storage tanks, primarily operating under the Solid Waste Management Act, underground storage tanks is referring primarily to underground fuel tanks like you would see at old gas stations, which historically have not been well maintained and can leak, and that causes obviously site contamination concerns in terms of fuel leaking into the ground from these underground tanks. So there's very strict standards on the removal and maintenance of those types of tanks. But more generally, under the Solid Waste Management Act, we regulate solid waste facilities, recycling centers, underground fuel tanks, and also go after illegal dumping. And again, the illegal dumping, sometimes the most challenging investigations we have are the ones where people are doing something they're not supposed to do without any type of already existing permitting oversight. If you have an existing facility that has a permit, that's, solid waste facility, you have that permit to rely on as a checklist to see exactly what they're supposed to be doing and base that on the investigation. When you're dealing with something like illegal dumping, one of the first challenges you have to face is how do you figure out who's dumping what, where, and then deal with that material. So there are certainly challenges in the different types of issues that these programs can deal with, and it runs the gamut from routine investigations that are not that difficult to figure out to incredibly complex multimedia actions that require significant coordination. Next slide. So our water and land use programs. The water program primarily operating under the Water Pollution Control Act or the Safe Drinking Water Act. The Water Pollution Control Act under the New Jersey Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or you might hear NJPDES as it's referred to, dealing with both point sources, meaning specific sources of pollution from a regulated facility. Think the classic outflow from some sort of industrial process, or non-point sources, which is more specific to stormwater discharges of pollutants. Also, and under the Safe Drinking Water Act, we regulate potable water sources and water supplies. And then the land use program, regulates the construction or development activities that go along with different land uses under these different statutes. The Freshwater Wetlands Protection Act, regulating both freshwater wetlands and transition areas to those wetlands. The Wetlands Act of 1970, which regulates mapped coastal tidal wetlands. The Waterfront Development, which includes both in-water and upland development, depending on where you are in the state. The Coastal Area Facility Review Act, or CAFRA, which specifically regulates coastal development in what's referred to as the CAFRA zone, which basically extends from Sandy Hook down around the Delaware Bay up to Salem. Then the Flood Hazard Area Control Act, where we regulate development in floodplains, as well as the regulation of development along riparian zones, vegetated buffers along regulated waters, stream corridors. If you've been around long enough, you might have in the past heard the flood hazard program primarily referred to as the stream encroachment program. Sometimes the language changes, but the scope of what we regulate typically remains the same. And then there's the Highlands Act, which specifically regulates development in the Highlands region. And these are all under the umbrella of the land use program. So that's just the very broad overview of the types of issues these programs touch on. The main point I want to make here is that for our office specifically, the Office of Enforcement Policy, we get pulled in to assist these programs, particularly when they're dealing with a specific circumstance that is either highly complicated, a significant environmental impact, something that they just need a little extra help and support with, whether that is in terms of coordinating multimedia enforcement actions, because sometimes you might have a violation that is both a water violation and a land use violation, or a solid waste violation or a land use violation. A good classic example of that is solid waste being illegally dumped in a freshwater wetland. Both programs will typically do their own investigation in terms of figuring out how that activity relates to their regulations. That might include a joint site inspection where inspectors from both programs go out to the same property to do the investigation at the same time. But that's not always feasible because we want to be able to be responsive to these incidents, and sometimes scheduling can make that complicated. So sometimes the inspectors do go out separately to review what's happening at a given site. But then there's that ongoing conversation between the programs in terms of making sure that the various either notices of violation or administrative orders that may be issued in response to a specific violation are done in a manner that are as consistent as possible to support each other. And that's really where our office comes in to facilitate that communication between programs, to make sure we're all on the same page to get to the end result that we want, which ultimately is compliance with our regulations and the abatement of any negative environmental impact that's occurred. Next slide. So now transitioning into the types of partnerships and coordination we have, because as I said earlier, the enforcement of environmental regulations is not just a DEP issue. It's not something we can do on our own. It's something that we have a lot of close relationships with other regulatory entities to help us out with. Within our own civil or administrative proceedings that we talked about earlier, we rely heavily on the deputy attorney generals over at the New Jersey Office of the Attorney General. In the Division of Law, the deputy attorney generals there are our primary representation in civil administrative proceedings. We have lawyers in-house at DEP, but we cannot represent ourselves in court. That's what the deputy attorney generals are for. They are our advocates in that process, and they're also the ones responsible for providing us with specific legal advice when we need it to resolve a particular issue. Also within the Office of the Attorney General, we have the Division of Criminal Justice, and the Division of Criminal Justice handles environmental crimes directly. They have an environmental crimes unit. DEP, through our administrative enforcement programs, does not have the authority to directly take criminal enforcement actions. If we have an investigation that we think may rise to the level of being a criminal violation of our various statutes, we can refer that over to the Division of Criminal Justice for them to investigate and pursue as appropriate, but it's not something that DEP does directly. As for other agencies on the federal level, we coordinate closely with US EPA, the Department of Agriculture, the Army Corps of Engineers. I've personally done joint inspections with the Philadelphia District of the Army Corps of Engineers back when I was in land use enforcement. Um, Sometimes having that additional support is really necessary when dealing with either, again, complicated enforcement issues or areas where you may have overlapping jurisdiction. On the more local level, we rely heavily on the soil conservation districts. They have a primary role to play, particularly in the stormwater space, when dealing with stormwater discharges from large construction sites. The soil conservation measures that they put in place as part of their soil erosion and sediment control plans are really rooted in that need to limit stormwater runoff of the soil that is disturbed in large construction activities. We also coordinate closely with the Pinelands Commission, including shared jurisdiction over some of our land use statutes. As I mentioned earlier, we have the County Environmental Health Act and the local environmental management programs that delegate to the county health departments certain inspections. And then we also rely on even municipal code enforcement. When somebody comes into a town to get a building permit, typically those forms have on there, do you have your flood hazard permit? Do you have your CAFR permit? It has some attestation or certification that a person's supposed to make that they've gone through the proper environmental reviews before getting that local construction approval. And so these are all people that we work with closely in terms of trying to make sure that people are complying with our various regulations. Next slide. So, and then to wrap up, getting into a couple different tools that we have for the public to specifically interact with the enforcement program. The main one I want to focus on is DEP Data Miner, because one of the concerns we get most frequently is that the community wants to know what's going on with a specific investigation, a specific enforcement process. They want to be involved in understanding how that process works. And unfortunately, the reality is that as the investigators and as the case managers, the department staff have an obligation to maintain a certain level of confidentiality when it comes to active and ongoing investigations. There's frankly a lot of information that we are simply not permitted to share with the public. But what Data Miner does is give the public a direct access to the department's internal database to see specifically those types of records that are available to the public in the enforcement space. So if you go to that URL, if you go to Data Miner and there's a category drop down and you want to select compliance and enforcement, you'll see this kind of search option screen where you can either search by site, search by category, search by published documents. And as you go through and explore that tool, you can really narrow down into specifically the type of information you want to get. You can search by date, county, town, enforcement program area. You can run a search to just say, I want to see every enforcement action taken in a particular town over the last 5 years. You can run different reports to get the sort of information that you're looking for to see what's going on with specific complaints or specific investigations. And if you have submitted a complaint to the DEP hotline and have that incident number that they give you once you file a complaint and want to know what's going on with that incident, you can get some of that information from Data Miner as well. And Data Miner will only show you what is final, effective, and public. So if there is an ongoing investigation and we haven't reached a final determination as to whether, yes, there's a violation or no, there's not, there may not be that much information on Data Miner. But if you're not seeing it on Data Miner, it's probably not something that we would be able to give you directly either. Because again, we have an obligation to maintain a certain level of confidentiality when it comes to ongoing investigations. Next slide. And then to wrap up, and I will stay on this very briefly because this is the focus of the next presentation. One of the key tools that we have as the department is the DEP hotline, the 24-hour call-in number, or the WARN-DEP app. I can say firsthand from when I was a inspector in the land use program, most of the investigations I did were based on complaints coming in through the hotline. It's a very important tool for the department to know what's going on out in the community. And it's really your first line of contact to the department when you see something happening that you think shouldn't be and that we need to take a look at. Next. And here you have my contact information, Armando's contact information, our general enforcement website. If there are specific questions that don't get addressed in the Q&A, you can reach out to us. And if it's something program specific, we can try to help connect you with someone who can get you the information you're looking for, and just try to help you figure out exactly what it is you're looking for. But please feel free to reach out to us at any time. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Joe. You really packed a lot of info in there. It was super educational. Thank you guys for posting some questions in the chat. We're going to hold those for now and jump right into Ivan's presentation. So next we have Ivan Alvarez from the Community Collaborative Initiative, who is going to give us the lowdown on WARN-DEP. Take it away.
Rihanna, if you want, I can answer a few questions while we're in the transition, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
That's Armando, our colleague, Joe's colleague from the Office of Enforcement Policy. So you can see a few questions in the chat if you want to take it away.
Yeah, just real quick, I'll at least answer a few. Julia asked, when an AO no CAPA or no CAPA occurs, where does the public come in? How do they know this is going on? So typically the timing of when the public becomes aware of these type of orders, it varies depending on the nature of the action and in full candidness, whether, for instance, the press is very interested once they're made public. I've had instances where I've seen where an enforcement officer, inspector will send it out, and within 3 hours, it's already in the press, depending on basically the type of action that it actually is involving. But what we always recommend, number one, people typically go through the OPRA process, but as Joe highlighted, was the ability to go through data miner. And then that will tie into the next question. From my understanding, data miner is up to date every day. As soon as something's approved, I think fairly quickly, it is put on data miner from our internal system, the New Jersey Environmental Management System. You may hear DEP folks say NGEMS a lot. That basically gives the data to data miner. Real quick, if an individual person or community feels that you have been harmed by environmental negligence or dumping, do they have to represent themselves in court against the offender, or is DEP the case representative? So as Joe highlighted, we, as the DEP, do not go to court ourselves. But luckily, New Jersey has a law, the Environmental Rights Act, which essentially allows citizens, organizations to file lawsuits against individuals, corporations, or governmental bodies. There are certain timeframes and notice requirements, but within that, it could potentially compel the department to take action or at least investigate something further. There are some restrictions in terms of them being frivolous and things like that. But in my time here, I've seen quite a bit of ERA notices come over to our Attorney General's office, who we work with at the Division of Law. And then not the final, I think this one was the last question I haven't touched on. Does the NJDP have odor emitting regulations for commercial cannabis manufacturing facilities? I'm going to add onto the chat our air enforcement's odor fact sheet. From my understanding, we do not necessarily regulate those specific types of facilities for odor, but there is general odor regulations that are under the Air Pollution Control Act, and the odor fact sheet gives folks a sense of how an odor investigation occurs with air enforcement. The biggest thing to know is an odor contaminant. They say odor is an air contaminant and therefore may be considered air pollution if it is present in a way that unreasonably interferes with the enjoyment of life or property. And our enforcement staff are trained to basically rate these odors in different capacities. I will include that fact sheet in the chat, and I figured, Ivan, I'll pass it over to you, but I figured I'd knock out some of the questions. Thank you, everyone.
All right, I think we're good to go. Or Rihanna, would you like me to share the presentation? I see Chloe still having some technical issues over there.
Yes, apologies, everyone. If you can share it, Ivan, that would be great.
Okay, I'll just wait for Chloe to stop sharing and I'll share my screen here. Let's see, entire screen. Share. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I could see the screen.
Can everyone see that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Rihanna. So, my name is Ivan Alvarez. I am a program specialist with the Community Collaborative Initiative program. I'm also a program specialist with the Local Government Assistance Program. Both of those programs fall under the Community Investment and Economic Revitalization Program. I've been with them for 2 years. Previous to my stint there, I actually worked at the Communication Center for 10 years, which falls under the Emergency Management Program. I started as a communications operator, worked my way up to a communications operator supervisor, and ultimately I ran operations there as the communications officer. So I'm pretty intimately aware with the operation that goes on at the comm center. Once again, it falls under the DEP Emergency Management Program, and the comm center is located inside the state police facility. So welcome to the NJDEP Communications Center. So the DEP Communications Center provides a statewide service 24/7, including nights, weekends, holidays, state of emergencies, and natural and man-made disasters. If there's an earthquake, if there's a hurricane, if there's a snowstorm, the Communications Center is open and open for business and ready to take environmental complaints, concerns, and nuisance complaints. The mission is to collect critical information and provide it to DEP environmental programs, different decision makers, first responders, and the DEP management team. So during the day and then after hours and any time in between, the DEP Communications Center is the face of the DEP. It's who you contact if you need to get hold of someone either during the day or after hours. There's always someone there to answer the phone. The two main resources that the department has for calling in and reporting environmental complaints, environmental emergencies, or nuisance or wildlife complaints is the 1877 WARN DEP line. Okay, that's a toll-free number that you can call in, and emergencies relating to facilities, laboratories, companies, businesses, other governments. Things like, residential concerns, permit violations, routine reports from facilities, laboratories, companies, and businesses. Another pretty cool resource that the department has is the WARN-DEP mobile app. So the mobile app is available both on Android and iOS, and it's designed for residents to report non-emergent issues or concerns, right? If it's a true emergency, environmental emergency, we want to make sure that folks are calling in on the phone to speak with a live person. But if it's, something of nuisance or non-emergent nature, we really would love for people to use the app. And then when calling in, another great thing that the department offers is language links. So when you call in, we have live interpreters that we can conference in 24/7 that speak up to 301 different languages. I wanted to go over the mobile app just so you can get a little feel of how it works. Let me just move this out of the way. So this is the Android version of the WARN DEP app. So as you can see here in the first slide, it gives you a disclaimer that it's not intended to report life-threatening or life-threatening or environmental emergencies. Called 911. So you have to hit OK for that. And then the next, it's the basic information, right? It'll ask you what the incident is, who you are. You can attach photos of the oil spill or someone dumping solid waste or whatever your complaint is, and then you can put your information in there as well. There's language support, so you can click for English or Spanish. You can also elect to remain anonymous or confidential, both in the app and when you call in. A lot of people want to call because they want to do the right thing, to report an environmental concern or someone doing something inappropriate or breaking the law, but they don't necessarily feel comfortable giving their name. So that's a pretty cool tool right here for that as well. And then in the app, you have different options that you can select on what you're reporting, whether it's improper disposal, odor, off-road vehicles, sewage complaints, smoke, dust, just to name a few. And then, it asks you for information on where it happened, the date that it happened, so on and so forth. This is the iOS version, so kind of like the same information. That's for the Apple users out there and iPhone users out there. As you can see here, it's going to ask you the same information, the who, the what, any photos you might have, where the incident occurred, any pertinent information that you can give so we can pass on to the investigators to go ahead and look into your environmental complaint. And as also you can attach photos, which I think is really awesome. So again, services are provided 24/7, 365 through the Action Hotline in the WARN-DEP app. Some examples of the type of the environmental reports that people call in are chemical or hazardous material spills or release, air quality complaints, drinking water quality issues, improper disposal or storage incidents, illegal dumping concerns, furniture, bags of trash, medical waste, whether it's residential or bulk waste, sewage incidents, waste removal issues, company not picking up scheduled trash and it gets all over the place, pesticide application complaints. Let's say someone is spraying pesticides at an apartment complex and they don't have the proper flags up or the proper warning, or they suspect they're not doing it correctly. That's one of the things that the department regulates pesticides. So we get calls for that. Wetland or coastal area concerns, clearing of vegetation or construction of a dock in a wetlands area or a buffer zone or a flood hazard area. The department gets a lot of calls in regards to that as well. And then also wildlife issues, black bear sightings, injured deers, injured foxes, nuisance raccoons, endangered species like bald eagles and turtles and things like that. The comm center handles those calls as well. So what does it look like when you call the DEP Communication Center? Well, you dial the 1877 number and you are greeted with by an operator. You speak with the caller. We're going to ask you what and where is the concern. We're going to ask you in-depth questions. The more information you can give us, the better, right? Because that'll be able for us to get a solid picture of your concern down with as much information as possible so that we can go ahead and get that over to someone that can, possibly help the situation. So we'll ask things like what's being impacted? Is it the air, the land, the water? What type of substance? If you smell something, what does it smell? Does it smell chemically? Does it smell spicy? Sometimes the department gets calls about a strong spice smell. Well, if you live close to a spice, warehouse or factory, they might be the culprit, right? So we want to get as much pertinent information as possible. Next, we'll generate what's called an incident notification report or an NGEMS report, which will list all the information that you gave us. We'll ask you all the probing and pertinent questions. After that, we will provide the caller with a 12-digit report number or case number. The reason we'd like to do this is because everyone should understand when you call the hotline to report an incident, they are not the investigators. They are simply the information gatherers. So they're taking your information, they're inputting it in the system, and then they're sending this information to whichever department of the DEP, excuse me, program of the DEP enforces your specific issue. If it's air enforcement, water enforcement, emergency management, coastal land use enforcement, pesticides, hazardous waste. I can go on and on and on. There's hundreds and hundreds of program sections within the DEP. So it's really important for us to determine, per what you told us, what is who's going to be the lead, so to say, investigator or program handling this. And then when we give you that 12-digit number, we also give you a public office number or follow-up number that you can follow up with that specific program to get any updates and status on your complaints. And then once we do that, we will notify the municipalities of where it occurred. If there's any hazmat incidents, the New Jersey has what's called an A310 notification law, which states if there's any environmental incident in your town that involves a hazmat, a hazardous material, whether known or unknown, we have to by law advise that town that we did receive such complaint. And then after that, we do send the report over to the program. Their investigator takes it from us, and then they do whatever they need to do in regards to investigating that environmental complaint. Environmental and wildlife notifications. So I thought it would be really, cool to get some visuals of what kind of calls we do take and what kind of things happen here in our state. We get calls for accidents, collisions, hazardous material spills. Like if you look at the top left, that's an oil sheen in the water, facility releases or violations, when Joe was speaking earlier from enforcement policy about the big smokestacks, right, and the facilities, all that is regulated by the department, and those facilities are required to call us if they go over their permit or there's a deviation of what's allowed to be released in the air. So a lot of the times it's not just complaints. The DEP hotline will get calls from the facility themselves reporting that they have violated a permit, which may be a stipulation in their permit that they have to do, call us within a certain amount of time. Natural disasters, fish mortalities, hurricanes, man-made disasters. That was a picture of the anthrax scare that we had back in the day. Biological chemical terrorism, and then sewage releases. To the bottom right, that was the vinyl chloride, the train derailment that leaked vinyl chloride. I was actually working that day that we received that phone call. So at any given moment, from the smallest incident, like a nuisance odor complaint, to the more serious, like a terrorist attack or a chemical spill, the DP Communication Center and the DP hotline will be taking those phone calls. Again, more pictures. This is a picture of a sloppy housekeeping. Those are abandoned drums that may have chemicals in them. Obviously illegal dumping. Green, toxic algae in the water, sunken vessels. Again, from at any given moment, it can be the smallest or the biggest environmental emergency. We're there to take the phone call, take a report, and get it over to our investigators and enforcement partners for follow-up. Aside from the environmental side, the DEP Communication Center and WARN-DEP hotline also takes calls for fish and wildlife, and also parks police. So not a lot of people know. The department has two law enforcement divisions that fall under them: the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Officers and the State Park Police. Both of them are sworn law enforcement officers, police officers that can write tickets, arrest you, run background checks, warrants, and everything in between. So we take calls for bear sightings. We take calls for illegal fishing. We take calls for illegal hunting, for deer hunting, and then we actually get that information out to the fish and wildlife game officers who will go out and investigate in their police vehicle. And if it's found that someone is violating the hunting or fishing laws in the state, they are issued a summons. And if they are doing something illegal, they do have the power to arrest you. Some of our partner agencies that we deal with every day in regards to receiving and passing along complaints and environmental concerns are the New Jersey State Police ROC, that's the Regional Operations Intelligence Center, the NRC, that's the National Reporting Center in Washington D.C. A lot of the reports that we'll get are from them. You know, someone will call them in Washington, D.C. to report a major environmental concern here in New Jersey, and then they'll go ahead and forward us that information so we can take a report and get moving and looking into that. The U.S. Coast Guard, like I said, oil sheens, sank vessels and tankers, fish mortalities on the coast. You know, we deal with them a lot, as well as the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. They're what we do on the federal level, and then the New Jersey Department of Health as well. So thank you. So that was my presentation, and please advise if you have any questions. Thank you so much, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Ivan. Now we're going to jump into Q&A. We're running a little bit over time, but depending on how many questions, we still want to get those answered. So right now we'll have Ivan Alvarez and Armando Alfonso answer a few questions from people joining. I know Armando already addressed some and you were answering some in the chat just now. So please, feel free to share any more in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Okay. Were there any specific questions for me in the chat while I was speaking, Rihanna?
I don't think so. Was a plastic
Yeah,
bag?
it was sort of a you question,
Okay.
but I know Solid Waste Enforcement has that website, so I posted it in regards to reporting plastic straws and plastic bags.
Got you. I just see it now. Awesome.
So the question was, does this apply to reporting non-compliance with the existing law? For example, food service establishments routinely give plastic bags, which is banned. And then Armando linked to Get Past Plastic webpage.
So we got another question: who responds to the coastlines when a beached whale is found? Kathleen, I hope you took my email down. If not, we'll make sure you get it. That is a question that I have never been posed before. I would imagine our fish and wildlife team is involved in that. But that's me.
Yeah, I've actually
making the
taken.
assumption.
Yeah, I've actually taken reports for that. So you are correct. The Fish and Wildlife would be out there, but also the DEP sections or programs would be maybe the coastal monitoring and also the biological freshwater monitoring or BMWCA, I believe it is. I always butcher it, but there are different programs within the DEP that would deal with those sort of fish mortalities on the beach. Yeah, yeah, at BMCWC, I believe. But yeah.
Okay, I see another one from Veronica. There's no penalty for making a report that ends up being non-criminal or within compliance, like Good Samaritan.
Is that for me?
Maybe for maybe for Armando.
Ivan, do you want to answer it from the perspective of you guys over at where you were before?
That is correct. So, no, I mean, as far as the hotline is concerned, I don't think, and Armando can speak to it more, but I don't think there's a penalty for making a report that ends up being non-criminal within compliance. I mean, not everyone out there, the general public, is is um is aware of every regulation or environmental law, and if they suspect something's going on, we want I mean, folks to call us. But if it goes out there and all the laws and regulations are being followed, I would think that's a good thing. So to answer your question, there is no, I wouldn't think there's a penalty for just making a report thinking that there's possibly an environmental, like we've had many calls where someone call and said, "Hey, someone's chopping down trees and this buffer zone and this flood hazard area. That's wrong. This and that." And then it turned out to be that they had permits, or they went through wetlands to get a proper wetlands permit to do the work. So I don't think there's a penalty, but we always, I mean, encourage people to call if they suspect something's wrong, and then let the investigators do their work and their job.
Yeah, I'll just highlight what Ivan said. Um, Obviously, have a good faith idea that you are dealing with an issue that's a compliance concern. We there are calls made all the time that end up resulting in no further action or no issues with compliance. But I will highlight, um, make sure that it's in good faith. Just like a typical false report to a police officer, that's different. But just keep it in good faith, understanding that if you are concerned and you have reason for concern, as Ivan pointed out, chopping down trees or maybe doing work around water, freshwater wetlands, things of that nature, reasonable concern, and obviously you can call that in. We always tell people, if you think there's an issue, call it in. Let us determine whether it is or it is not.
Yep. And I do see a question in regards to the average phone calls. And just to go back to your question, Kathleen, I found out. So for the coastline for the beach whales, it's the NJDEP Bureau of Marine Water Monitoring. So that's who along with additional other programs would be out there investigating that, or looking into that. Now, in regards to average calls per day, it can vary, right? So it can vary based on the weather. It can vary based on the time of season, right? So if it's a nicer part of the year where folks are out on trails, right, in the springtime and summertime, and they're hiking, right, or they're visiting parks, they're out at Island Beach State Park, and they're it can be very busy versus other times of the year it could be less busy, but then it can also still be busy, because it just all depends. It all depends on what's going on, and all depends on the time of year. It depends on where geographically in the state you live. But I mean, it could be 100 calls. It could be 300 calls. There's no set. You just never know. The thing about the hotline is it services all 21 counties. It services the whole state of New Jersey. And they don't just take environmental, they also take the law enforcement calls as well. So they're pretty busy over there servicing. It's not like, you know, let's say a state police where they have different regions that handle calls, or the Department of Transportation that might have different regions that handle different calls, where they might have call centers in the north, the central, the south, and along the coast, and then they divvy up their operators. Everything, that the comm center and the hotline handles all 21 counties, as well as calls from outside the state in regards to any complaints. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Can we could take maybe one more question if anyone wants to raise their hand or share it in the chat. I see Kathleen has a follow-up. How quickly do you sort through these complaints?
So we don't sort through them. As soon as you call the comm center and report it to us, we'll file the New Jersey NGEMS report. It's called environment. It's a report that goes into our New Jersey Environmental Management System. It's called NGEMS. So once we create that report, we get it over to whichever program within the DEP enforces that issue. Now, people need to understand, these programs are they're busy, yeah, and these programs work on these cases and as they're received, right? So while we love that folks call in environmental concerns, we also stress and preach a little bit of patience, right? Like you'll have some folks that'll call an environmental concern and then call back the very next day, or call the program the very next day wanting a resolution to it. That's not how it works. It might have to be assigned to an investigator. The investigator has to do their due diligence, and once again, these are looked at in the order that they are received. So there's a lot of variables that come into play. So it's hard to say it's hard to say how, fast something is solved or how fast the case is attended to, but just know that our investigators and our programs at the departments are professionals, and they're great at what they do, and we pride ourselves in investigating and getting to the bottom of environmental concerns.
All right, thank you so much, Ivan, Armando, and Joe. Let's go on to the next half of our evening. We're a little bit over time, but not too bad. So we're gonna go to Vince Caliguire, also from the Community Collaborative Initiative, who will share about local enforcement projects. Take it away, Vince.
Thank you, Yana. Before I get started, I want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. I know, it's hard coming in the evening of your families and everything. Appreciate you taking your time to hear some of the things that we have to say. So I'm going to try to use your time effectively and get some pertinent information. My name is Vincent Caliguire. I am the manager of the Community Collaborative Initiative. We've been in effect really since 2019. Originally, we worked out of the Brownfields department, and even Armando, who you heard talk earlier, was part of it, and he was a former liaison in our Community Collaborative Initiative. Since that time, we've now been in a new department. We're now in CEER, which stands for Community Investment and Economic Revitalization, and it gives us more resources, more units to programs that we can utilize for our cities that we serve. Including like Clean Acres, Historic Unit, and our grants and government agencies. So without further ado, we can go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our program, the Community Collaborative Initiative. What we really do is we're a special unit that focuses on the environmental issues facing some of the most distressed cities here in New Jersey. And not only the environmental issues, but the economic and the quality of life issues too. We find that there's a synergy between those things. And if we move the dial on one of those, it will move all three. And we keep that momentum in what we do. We're looking in these distressed cities, working with the municipal government, with nonprofits, with private industry, trying to make projects work, seeing what they're doing and making them move further, trying to get them to go over hurdles and things like that. And it can encompass a lot of different things. Some of the projects we've been involved in recently includes food deserts, cleanups, working on redevelopment. And I'll go into some of those projects and encompassing some of the things we do and highlighting it once we go through this a little bit. But before I go into that, I want to introduce my team here who've done a great job for us. Ivan Alvarez is on the left there in the picture. You can see he spoke just before us, and he's doing a great job with us, bringing what he knew about from the comm center into our CCI network. And next to Ivan, we have Valeria Angel, who takes care of our northern sector. Catherine Dolman, who also takes care of our northern sector. Tiffany Falcone, taking care of some of our southern cities. Myself, Corey V. Scott, who is helping us in the northern sectors. And next to her is Gary Stevenson, who just came on, actually, is in a part-time effort. We do have some part-timers. He's the former mayor of Paulsboro. His knowledge of municipal government and the things that happen with that have been invaluable and helps us with what we do. We do a lot with the governments, and knowing how those work is always helpful. And last but not least, we have Zach Reed at the end. He works in different functions throughout CEER, and he's been a great help to us. On the right, you can see the cities that are with the CCI unit. We have 12 cities, those being, as you can see here, Paterson, Jersey City, Newark, Bayonne, Perth Amboy, Trenton, Camden, Paulsboro, Salem, Vineland, Bridgeton, Millville. We do other things, we do other cities besides this. I do what I call one-offs whenever anybody calls, and that includes for this session. If anyone has any issues in your city, whether or not you're a CCI city, I will help you. We'll get a call back, and if I can't help you, I'm going to find someone who does. But these cities were originally signed with the legislation that formally adopted us in the beginning in 2019, and really that was based upon the brownfields issues that they were facing and the environmental issues, and depending whether they want to partake in the program or not. So these are the 12 cities we have. But like I said, we do a lot of different things for other towns. I work as much in Penns Grove, I think, in some of our CCI cities. But anybody who's got an effort, wants to do finish a project or something like that, is where we try to work and and make movement in for this so that we can move things forward. Next slide. Yeah. The aspects of CCI and what we do can be very broad. Every city is different. The southern cities in New Jersey, you can imagine, a lot different than northern cities with almost different tasks that we do for them. By and large, for what we do depends on what the city and what their priorities are. And that includes like the nonprofits, the community. We encompass all of that. And that's part of what we're doing with when we're embedded, because we can really do something with these towns, being embedded and getting hearing the voices of everyone that's involved. And we work with our other departments like our environmental justice department here, trying to get that in public forums and get the real opinion of things. But one of our programs that we recently restarted is our legal dumping camera program. And you can see one of the cameras here in the picture. Originally, we did this in 2021, right after and during COVID. And part of the issue with that was we didn't get that in-person training for folks. We didn't get that support that they needed. And these cameras could be technical. So I wanted to relaunch this. I don't want to see these cameras seeing here. You know, the taxpayers paid for them. We need to use them. And I know our communities needed this, especially right after COVID. Illegal dumping really exploded in some of the cities, and people were really hard to come to choice on what they could do for it. So we wanted to restart this. We gave it out to some of our cities who wanted to participate. We had 7 cities who decided to come in, and you can see them located here: Paulsboro, Salem City, Millville, Camden, Vineland, Pattison, and Perth Amboy. And what we want to do, like I said, in this iteration is get more training, talking about the whole aspects of illegal dumping, and then seeing how the program could work then. And then, and also because of COVID being finished, we get more in-person support, things of that nature. Next slide. So we knew that we had an issue in 2019. We knew we had to do something different. So what we decided to do was do a training session for 2 days, and we invited the participants of the towns that wanted to come in. Each during the training was receiving different training on the aspects of the camera, everything it does, and different aspects of it. And by the way, these cameras themselves are specifically modeled for illegal dumping. They come from a company called QStar. They're developed to just handle that capacity. They're smaller modules. They're built tough. They can handle a lot of abuse. But more importantly, what they're very good at is capturing license plates, which can help in enforcement, and getting great pictures so that you can do that enforcement part, because a picture, as we all know, is 1,000 words, and very good in legal aspects. But another part of this is that there's a warning module on there, and you can actually get a warning, voice warning that comes up, and I'll play it right now. You can hear it.
Stop. This is a restricted area, and your photograph was just taken. We will use it to prosecute you. Leave the area now.
So you can see something like that with the voice coming at you, spotlight comes on you when you're doing something you're not supposed to, can really stop you in your tracks. Literally, you see some of the pictures too where people stop in their tracks. These cameras can be set up on delay the picture, delay the warning, have one or the other. Each town uses it in the way that they see fit. What they want them to do is use them. You know, in the major cities, we're seeing a lot of use with these, and in capturing and the prosecution. But what we're seeing a lot more of is that with that warning signal that's happening, it enables the towns to kind of put away, like where they're having issues of illegal dumping, they're putting the camera there and it's going away or going somewhere else. And if you move these cameras and if you're strategic in what you do, you know, they could be very productive. But with our training session, what we were able to do is get people the right kind of training. We also taught them on different aspects. We had different representatives coming from enforcement and legal as well. Talk about different aspects in terms of the fines. You know, even having witness and reward hotlines for calling into legal dumping. Redoing your resolution so that the fines reflected correctly. Because what we found was a problem with low fines, because if the violators, and most of this has to deal with construction debris, but a lot of the violators will keep doing it until they see, hey, unless if it's cheaper to dump it here, they're going to do it. So if you create fines and encompass everything with it and involve the police with a full effect, you can really make a dent with the legal dumping. In fact, one of our cities, Camden, really has taken it to another level, pushes program. They even got additional cameras, eye in the sky modules that could be used within the city. They changed the resolutions, had a warning number, and among other things. And you can actually see the crime level drop. It's been dropping significantly. And here's the exciting part about it, and something that we always thought about, but we weren't sure. But we noticed from what we're seeing on the streets and being embedded. But if you take care of the illegal dumping problem, that helps take care of a lot of other things. If your environment changes to where people feel like it's not a place where I can do drugs, where crime can happen, they'll go away. It does help, and it does make a significant difference. So we feel like this program has been a real good success so far. So far, since we had that training session in August, we'll be going 6 months, and we're really seeing a great difference in these communities and positive influence. And also, we're going to really kick it in as we get into the spring and summer, and try to get more people involved with this, using the cameras more, catching more violators, and making a difference in these communities. So we'll see what happens. And as I mentioned too, one last thing, the program that Canada did was so good. We actually had our folks from Patterson who were in the camera program come down to Canada and see what they were doing and try to emulate it up there. So we're having a great effect. And you can see how the collaboration part of CCI is a real thing, because that's what we're trying to do. Collaborate with ourselves and our communities, but also having the other communities collaborate within that network to try different solutions, to look at problems a different way and get a different perspective, because that's a big part of how you solve these problems. Next slide, please. All right. Now, Joe earlier talked about this, our supplemental environmental, so we call SEPs or SEPs. And by the way, Joe and Armando have been a great help in us trying to bring back the SEPs program, because it was something that was used a lot in DEP a number of years ago. So when we first looked at this, I saw an opportunity here and try to involve the department to try to bring this back forth. And we're in the beginning stage of this right now. So this will take time to develop, and it's a lot of part of the legal process. And we're going through that to find the right kind of fit for this. But basically, just so you all know, a SEP, what it does is you're taking, a violator if they have fines or a judgment against them and trying to repurpose that to where we can do an environmental type of project. And in that area where the violation occurred, and something that could be against what that violation was, to try to combat it. So we're looking for the perfect kind of instances for it, and look to use this. And especially nowadays, as we all know, as federal funding seems to be, will be trickling down, that will affect the state and federal funding. So finding other sources of funding for environmental projects, we think could be a big help for the community, and be something that we could watch instead of dealing with the grant administrator or something else like that. And we'd be right there on the ground, the violation actually being corrected, the people in the community, reaping the rewards of that. I think is very productive, and we're going to try to expand on this. Next slide. Now, the one thing we're not going to do, and we're going to be very careful how we proceed with this, because we want to do it the right way. But we're not going to have bad players involved with this. We don't want to do that. This is something I think really for a program for people who are trying to do the right thing. Because you have to understand, there are a lot of things environmentally that a lot of companies have to do to sustain themselves, and they do have to pay fines to sustain that until we find alternatives for that energy source. So having something like this is a good way for some of these companies to give back and try to do something, because we do have a lot of companies that are doing the right thing, or into the environment, to their public, and serving their public in the right way. So we try to encourage that, and we're looking forward to see what this can do. I know I am, because it will be really great to see what this can do in the communities that we're serving, and having something right away that we can use for a source to help with these projects. Next slide, please. All right. One of the more fun things we do here with CCI that we started up is our cleanups. Now, the folks here at DEP, we're able to volunteer, use a day of service once per pay period for a volunteer effort, environmental cleanups and things like that. So I wanted to organize this the right way, because of a lot of our cities were asking us for volunteers for different projects. So we thought this would be a great way to. There's a few good things for this, actually. One, it's great for the community, because you're getting DEP people there, and they see this a lot on our cleanups. The volunteers are talking to the DEP people. DEP people are talking to them. We're talking about ideas. We're talking about the problems they have and what they're facing. Now the people at DEP, that person who's doing a valuable job writing the permits, which is very important for us, very important. They get their hands outside in nature and see, what is this permit doing and how is that affecting it? and they're able to get some physical work, esprit de corps. It's very good for our teamwork here at DEP and keeps our passion up, because that's a big part of why we're here with the Department of Environmental Protection, our passion for the environment and conservation. So we're getting those people out. We're taking care of projects that couldn't normally be done, and we're getting out in the community, getting better relationships. And you never know what happens. Just from the Camden cleanups alone, we at CCI have been able to develop a great relationship with the mayors, council, and it gets us outside of the office. So we're not just talking about problems. We're talking about the whole situation in the environment and getting to know each other, which creates lasting relationships and allows us to work further into things when you have that established. Next slide. All right. And by the way, that previous slide you saw there, we had a cleanup at Liberty State Park recently, cleaning up microplastics that Corey V was the leader of. Really went well and got a lot of things out of there. April's our big month for these volunteer cleanups, but we are trying to develop this. So we have, I mentioned, you can do it every quarter, something for each quarter. So some of the ones we have developed right now are going to be Perth Amboy, Camden, Petty's Island in Camden, and also be doing something in Trenton as well. And all these projects, it could be encompass a lot of different things: tree planting, removing an invasive species, and cleanups that we're known for. And we really do a good job of cleaning it up and making a difference. And it's a positive part of the community, puts us in a positive light, and we get a lot out of it. And one thing I wanted to make a point of with volunteering, folks, I know Earth Month's coming up, and Earth Day. I encourage anyone out there, if you have the time or your family, bringing them out there to volunteer. It's a great day to do it. Service is a big thing, and good time to get out in the environment. So there'll be all kinds of things going on. And if you're interested in, any of those cleanups too, a lot of the volunteers you could still go for a lot of these events. Most of them we usually team up with the city themselves with the function they're running and try to help them along with their function, or we may even do our own and combine with nonprofits in the area. We do it a lot of different ways. And by the way, if anyone has cleanups, if your town, something else like that, I'd be welcome to hear. You can always contact me. Next slide. All right. Well, hey, I could tell everyone here, I enjoyed talking about all these things. I always do. If anyone could tell you DP, I like to talk. But my information is here. I welcome any questions, anything. If your town's not a CCI town, I don't care. I want to help people that are trying to make a difference. That's what we're about. And I do apologize. I won't be here for the question session, but Ivan, who's with our CCI, will be able to answer any of your questions. And like I said, feel free to contact me anytime. And thank you for coming in and listening to me. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Vince. We got a few questions in the chat, and so we're just going to hold those for now and jump straight into Anna Maria O'Connor's presentation, who's going to talk to us a little bit about Data Miner.
Hi, thank you, Rihanna. Before I share my screen, I'm going to paste the link for our Environmental Justice Mapping, Assessment, and Protection Tool, or EJMAP. So you can click on that link. It should take you right to EJMAP, and you can look at it while I'm presenting or save it for another time. But let me go ahead and share my screen. Oh, 1 second. Okay, now let me start it from the beginning. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Rihanna. Okay, so like Rihanna mentioned, my name is Anna Maria O'Connor. I work in the Office of Environmental Justice. I'm in the Science and Policy Unit. And today I'm going to be talking about accessing NJDEP enforcement reports through EJMAP and giving you a little bit of an overview. Previously, I used to work in what was formerly called the Division of Solid and Hazardous Waste. So I have a lot of experience with these reports and with using data miner and NGEMS, which is the computer system that you've heard from a few of our presenters that feeds into data miner. So let's give it a go. So when you look up the Environmental Justice Mapping and Assessment and Protection Tool, or EJMAP, it'll bring you to this screen. So like I said, I had the link in the chat for you. You can also just Google NJDEP EJMAP, and it should be one of the first links to pop up. And so when you click on the link, it'll bring you to this page, and you'll notice that there are a few tabs at the top. It just shows you some of the different features that EJMAP has. So like an introduction, for example, where you can learn a little bit more about some of the background related to EJMAP, some of the background related to the environmental justice law. We also have the next tab, which is how to use EJMAP, which is particularly helpful, and I encourage you to look through that. We have a tab for overburden communities, which helps you to visualize overburden communities in New Jersey, a tab for facilities, which I'll be going over, and a tab for stressor summary. And stressor summary is basically the stressors, the environmental and public health stressors that are assessed in New Jersey, and to see, what overburden communities are impacted by those stressors. So before we get into facilities, I just want to give you a brief recap about what an overburdened community is. So an overburdened community is defined by our environmental justice law. In order to be considered an overburdened community, you have to have a block group that is at least 35% of households that qualify as low-income households, or at least 40% of the residents that identify as minority members of a state uh, minority, or as members of a state recognized tribal community, or 40% of the households with limited English proficiency. And you'll see on the right side of the screen, we have a map of New Jersey that has the current layout of the overburdened community block groups. And you'll see in the legend the different colors that are associated on whether or not those block groups are limited English, low income. Adjacent just basically means that there's no population that lives there. But in order for us to avoid, having facilities just like going in and citing, in the adjacent communities that are right next to overburdened communities, we have them labeled as adjacent. They're regulated as the same as overburdened communities. So you might have heard me mention block groups. So that's the unit of analysis for overburdened communities. So it's one of the smaller units of measurement here. It's basically a collection of residential blocks, mostly between 600 and 3,000 people. So we measure overburdened communities on the block group level. So turning to facilities, so this map, this environmental justice mapping tool, talks about and covers facilities that are covered by the EJ law. So when you look at the map, you might think like, oh, well, I'm not seeing warehouses, or I'm not seeing another type of facility that's not mentioned here. And that's because those are the facilities that are mentioned in the environmental justice law, that have specific permits that are associated with them. So this is the list of those facilities. We have major sources of air pollution, or Title V facilities, resource recovery facilities or incinerators, sludge processing facilities, combustors or incinerators, sewage treatment plants that have the capacity of at least or greater than 50 million gallons per day, transfer stations, solid waste facilities, or recycling facilities, where recycling facilities process at least 100 tons of recycled material per day, scrap metal facilities, landfills, and medical waste incinerators, which is exempting those that are regulated for like self-disposal. So going back to the home page, you'll see that I circled the facilities tab at the top. That's where you're going to go in order to look for your enforcement reports. So once you click on the facilities tab, you'll be brought to a screen that shows you the outline of New Jersey and all of these different colors of dots and shapes and things. If you click where the red circle is, you'll see the legend that pops up. And the legend has all of the explanations of what those shapes mean. So it'll tell you, that this blue circle is a major source of air pollution. This green square is a recycling center. And so it's really helpful to navigate. So what I did here is I zoomed into Trenton. I always use Trenton as the example since our DEP office is located here, our main office. And so I zoomed into a particular facility that I highlighted here in red. And you'll notice that it has a few unique characteristics to it. There's this it's similar to this one that's right next to it. It's an orange circle with this like green diamond in the middle. That means that there are multiple entities at the same location. So that's something that you'll want to keep in mind as we go through the remainder of this presentation. But when you click on that dot, it'll bring you to this dialog box that you have here on the side, and it tells you the name of the company, and it gives you these arrows at the top that help you navigate between the different boxes within the dialog box. Because like I mentioned, there are multiple facilities that could be located in the same area. There could be a recycling center and a transfer station and a scrap metal facility or something like that. So you'll want to make sure that you're looking at the correct facility in which you're interested. So the particular facility that I was interested in is this solid waste facility. So you have the PI name, which is basically just the name of the company, the site ID, which is the address of the company. So anything that is located at that site ID will have this same site ID, but it could be uh, various different entities that exist there, and I'll get into that in a second. And then we have the preferred ID number. And so that is also a identifier in order to locate the facilities in Data Miner. And so when you click on this part here that says inspections, violations, and incident reports, this is where it'll bring you. It'll bring you to Data Miner. And so you've heard NGEMS being mentioned a few times. So NGEMS is our internal computer system that feeds into Data Miner. And like was mentioned before, the website is updated pretty much instantly. As soon as information is published into NGEMS and is made available, Data Miner is routinely doing updates. And so what was also mentioned too, it's only publicly available information. So any information that's labeled in NGEMS as being like public or open to the public, you're able to see on Data Miner. There's some options where there is that confidentiality that you won't be able to see it, and so it won't come up. So when you clicked on that link, it'll bring you to this introduction page, and it basically gives you an outline of what this report is, like what's the point of the report, and how to like print and save the data that you upload, and then also this glossary of terms, which is really important. And so when you click on that link for the glossary of terms, it brings you to a whole page of just general or different definitions and words and terminologies that are used commonly within these reports. So I just screenshot one of the pages here, but it's a great tool in order to help you navigate the reports because sometimes there are different acronyms or words that aren't, um, as intuitive. And so this will help navigate your experience with the enforcement reports. So I encourage you to click on that. So when you go to the next tab at the top, it says site information, and it gives you all of the information for that specific site. So I'm going to give like an analogy. When we think of a site ID, or when we think of a site, it's a contiguous area that operates under the same ownership or operational control. So let's say that you have this one big piece of property. Let's say it was like a shopping plaza, and let's say the whole shopping plaza is owned and operated by one person. That whole shopping plaza would be considered the site ID. But then you have all these different entities that are within the shopping plaza. And so those different entities would be like different businesses. And so those would be considered like the different PIs. So these PIs, these program interest numbers, correspond to different media programs. So you'll see here where it says active program interest at the site, you'll see that there's pretty similar names here. and it's all really being like almost the same company. But every time that there is a file with a different media program at the department, there's going to be a new PI associated with it. So it's as if this company, Mercer Group, is like um, a drawer in a filing cabinet. And when you open the drawer, there's all these folders in it, and all the different folders are different PIs. And all the files within those folders are pertaining to those programs. So you have something for air, hazardous waste, radiation, etc. Another thing to note is that data can be exported as a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet. So if you're looking for a particular facility and you want to download this information, perhaps for a community meeting or something and you want to have it on hand with you, you can export it as a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet, depending on if you want to be able to manipulate some of the data in terms of making it like easier for you or getting the information that is most important to you. I would recommend Excel. PDF is a little bit cleaner to look at. And also keep in mind that some of the links in the Excel spreadsheet might not work properly. You'd have to like copy and paste them, or you can always revisit the actual report in order to get those working links. Okay, so when you click on the next tab for inspections, like Joe was mentioning, there are various different types of inspections that occur at these facilities. They could be routine inspections that are associated with the permit, or they could be inspections because of a complaint or something that was received on like the WARN-DEP hotline. So one thing to keep in mind is like if you remember that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there might be similar facilities at the same address, or you um, are interested in a certain media program. So like you're interested in the air uh, violations or the air reports. You want to make sure that this PI number is matching the number that you are interested in. So in the beginning of the presentation, the solid waste facility was this 197093 number. And so I just want to make sure that I look at this table, find that number, and then I would click for the inspection summary. If I was to look at this like 132273, that would correspond to a different program entity, and you wouldn't be getting necessarily the information that you are wanting to find. Another thing to note is you have these like activity numbers and types. So you see that BCI is here. That means brief compliance inspection. It tells you, again, where the media program is. And media is just like air, water, land, solid waste, things like that. The inspector, when the inspection occurred, and if the inspection resulted in compliance, like it being an incompliant or not. So when you click on the inspection summary, it'll bring you to a page that looks like this. At the top, it gives you some disclaimers about the report, like how old the data is. Um, Here, it gives you more of like the specific information, the activity number, when it occurred, address, the inspector, things like that. And then there's these comments that are at the bottom, and the comments are basically just notes from the inspector through their inspection that they had done. So you can read that at at your leisure. And then when you scroll down on that same page, you'll come to these tables. And these tables are basically like a checklist of what they're looking for in their inspections. So you can see, like, for transparency, like what these inspectors are looking at, and if the facility was in compliance with that particular inspection. Any of the comments, if they weren't in compliance, there would be some grace period that would be here, and the source of where that inspection requirement is. So like these are all within the rules. Okay, so going to enforcement actions, which many people are typically interested in, is, seeing where facilities are in violation of department regulations. So when you go to this enforcement actions tab, you'll get, again, you can have this class, click on the glossary terms to familiarize yourself. You'll also see it got cut off at the bottom, but there's this enforcement actions, terms, and explanations, like explanation. And it gives you a little bit more information of what the different acronyms mean as you navigate the reports. So as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to stick with the same PI, the same media program, the same facility. It doesn't have any enforcement actions, but we'll look at this top PI, this 132273 for an example. Just for some context, PEA is prescribed enforcement action and NEA is negotiated enforcement action, and those can be found underneath the table. Joe kind of alluded to this earlier that there are certain enforcement actions that, the basically uh, the there is no like negotiation, which is the prescribed enforcement action, and there are enforcement actions where there are negotiations and settlements, which would be the NEA. So when you click on that link that I had circled before, it'll bring you to a table. It'll show you the description of the non-compliance, and it'll give you the citation so you can cite it in the rules. And you can also click on the links for related inspections or related violations. If there's like follow-up or anything like that, you can search those links for that as well. And so reorienting myself. So when you click on that link, it brings you to another description of the non-compliance and when it occurred, if the violation status was satisfied or not satisfied, and when compliance was achieved. And it'll give you some information like that as well. And then finally, we have the tab for incidents. So incidents are things that can be reported to the department through the WARN-DEP hotline, and they can come from in uh, uh, they can end up being from various different, either the department or at the county level. So an example here, you can see that the status says that there was CHA that was involved, the County Environmental Health Agency. So sometimes what happens is when a call goes into the WARN-DEP hotline, um, the issue could be sent to the county. It could be sent to the department, and the department sends it to the county. And then, if that's the case, if the county responds, the county also has this obligation to um, conduct this like follow-up inspection write-up and put it in NGEMS, and then you can see it here in Data Miner. So any sort of those incidents can be found here. Another thing to note is that the incidents from all PIs that are associated at this site are included. So if you are, thinking of like, again, if you were to think of that analogy of like the shopping mall, the strip mall, um, anything at that strip mall would come up as an incident. Here, there's no like distinguishing PI, but they have an incident number. So you can look up the incident number in Data Miner on your own, and you can find more information that way as well. Just something to keep in mind as you navigate that. Um, and I think that's it. So I know that was a very quick run through of the enforcement reports. Something to note also is that, um, one of the main reasons of having the enforcement reports being available on EJ Map is so that way they could be centrally located. So when you're looking at EJ Map, you can easily go and find the reports, and also to increase transparency and to be able to help community members and equip them with the knowledge that they need for what's going on in their community, and have them have that power with them too. If you have any questions, I have my email here, and that's pretty much it. You can learn more about OEJ and everything at our website.
Thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much, Anna Maria. That was a great presentation. Data miner is not easy to tackle, so thank you for that overview. Vince, could you join us again for the Q&A? We had a few questions in the chat during the Vince's presentation. Let me see.
He had to hop off. I can try to answer any CCI related questions.
Okay, awesome. I think the first one is from Kathleen. How does a city qualify for a CCI unit? Why isn't there one in South Jersey, like in Atlantic City or Pleasantville?
Yeah, so in regards to the cities, this predates me, but from how I understood it, When this program was formed, I know originally it was heavily involved with the folks from like Brownsfield, the Brownsfield section and stuff like that. And from how I learned about it, that it worked was a bunch of outreach was done to a bunch of distressed cities right around the state that were underserved and underserved, and these were the cities that showed interest and applied, and then the department went through the application process, and these were the cities that were picked. In regards to South Jersey, there is cities in South Jersey. We have Vineland, we have Salem. We have Vineland, Salem City, Bridgeton, Paulsboro. So we do have some cities in southern New Jersey that are part of the CCI program. And then you have Trenton, you have Camden. Then you have the northern cities like Perth Amboy and Bayonne and Jersey City and Newark. So we do have a good mix of cities from the northern region, the central region, and the southern region.
Thank you for that, Ivan. And also, if anybody asks a question and we're not totally sure what the answer is, we'll get back to you, and either you individually or maybe we'll send some
Yeah.
the follow-up email.
Yep.
That we'll send after with like links and PowerPoints and stuff like that. So keep posting your questions. I'll read the next one. From Kaylee, it would be interesting to know how many areas with the cameras focus on areas with stormwater infrastructure or storm drains. I'm not sure if you'd know that one, Ivan.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, we work with the towns collaboratively. So, the towns in our illegal dumping camera program, basically they know the hot spots for illegal dumping in their area, right? That's what it's mainly used for illegal dumping, for deterrence. So it's on a city by city basis, but obviously we would want them to put the cameras where they're having the most issues with illegal dumping.
The next question is from Swarna. Who reviews and approves the SEP, and are there any progress reports that are required? Is there a real world example that you could share about a successful SEP? I think Armando, did you reply to that in the chat?
Yeah. So yeah, I could just reiterate it. So the review and approval of the SEP is typically within the enforcement program area and follows a similar path to their specific program's delegation authority. So if there's a certain value, each program has different numbers in terms of settlement authority for different levels of management. It would follow that same trajectory. And then a respondent must submit to the DEP in regards to progress reports. The intervals would be determined during the settlement agreement drafting. So that would be something that's negotiated between the DEP and the violator. And then I provided the SEP webpage. I will say we're hoping to get some new SEPs up there, but we have some older SEPs that were successful. The SEP policy was DEP wise relatively new in terms of being adopted. I believe it was in the beginning of last year. So we're starting to see inquiries coming in for the programs asking questions about talking to violators about potential SEPs that they could implement in different program areas. And I provided that webpage as well so everyone has an opportunity to see the different SEPs that we already have highlighted online. And as I said before, feel free to reach out to Joe or myself for additional questions. We don't mind answering them.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that summary. Okay, any other questions? I'm not seeing any others in the chat. You could also raise your hand if you'd like to ask one verbally. Okay, I see another one from Kathleen about CCI cities. I, Can communities apply to be a CCI city?
I'm not sure that, but I
So
can
I
get.
was,
Go
I
ahead.
could talk
Yeah,
about at least the initial go around.
yeah.
Um,
From when it first was launched, right?
yeah.
Yes,
So I
sir.
know
Yeah.
um, there was, as you said, they reached out to the different municipalities and essentially, I don't say it was a vetting process, but it was to figure out who, and again, under the context of what you also said regarding brownfields, kind of mixing those two worlds to see who could benefit from that program. I don't know, since I've been out of the program, I'm not sure as the discussion of expansion or how that is going, but I know initially they decided on these for a variety of reasons, but the two most heavily were tied to the municipality's ability to participate, and they're tied back to the Brownfields Redevelopment Area program.
Another one from Veronica. Does DEP have outreach programs where you may come speak with community groups or schools? Well, I guess we could ask for CCI or OEP since Armando's here as well. If you guys do that with schools or other community groups.
I'll just speak from our office's perspective. Typically, we're not going out to community groups or schools, but we do coordinate with what I'm hoping for the next few seminars with the different enforcement groups about inspectors discussing whether it be their day to day or facility. I don't want to say facility specific, but a type of facility and how they go about their inspections. So we do a lot of that in terms of help communicating and getting people to those types of events. But it has been some time since we had any of those type of inquiries come up to our office because I think typically people will reach out to the inspectors themselves. But we're always here to help.
Yeah, and in regards to CCI, specifically for CCI cities, the cities that we work in, we do a lot of outreach. We go to community events, we go to public meetings. We are embedded and involved in the community when it pertains to specific CCI towns. Yes.
Yeah, and I think for DEP in general, we'd have to get back to you because I think all the different programs do different things, different outreach, and there might be some programs that do like outreach to schools specifically, but I'm not totally sure about that, so I'd have to look into that and get back to you.
Ron, I'll just add as a
Okay,
note
Jody.
for department staff as a whole. Most of they work at the DEP for a reason, so a lot of folks love to present what they work on. So though they may not do it regularly, I know a ton of programs would be interested in participating in things like that.
And also plug our office, the Office of Environmental Justice. We get a lot of questions and stuff as well. So if you email our general email or call our number, we could either help you out directly or direct you to the right office. If you have like a question or requests like that, we could help direct it. But yeah. Okay, so we are a little bit over time, but if there's maybe like one last question, we could take it. Anything for Anna Maria, if anybody wants to learn more or has questions about that presentation. Okay, so I guess we will wrap it up here. Thank you so much to everyone for taking time out of your evening to join us. And thank you so much to DEP staff for providing these great presentations. And thank you to my staff, Christina Gonzalez and Chloe Landau, for putting this together. This wouldn't have been able to happen without them. Don't tune out just after tonight. We have 2 more great meetings coming up. Please join us in Newark next week. That meeting will also be hybrid if you want to join online. And in Camden the following week. Next week, the presentation will focus on odors, how to report odors, how odors are enforced. It's not a simple issue, so the North Jersey Air Enforcement team will be presenting on that. We will be collaborating with the Ironbound Community Corporation to host that meeting at one of their offices in Newark. And there will also be some advocates joining us to talk about some air monitoring projects they're working on. And then the following week, we will be in Camden with solid waste, water, and coastal land use to learn about their work. And that will also be online as well in hybrid. So thank you guys so much. And we will follow up as well with an email with the PowerPoints and any links we talked about. So yeah, thank you. Have a great night.